And in response to those recent Russian air attacks, Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby says the U.S. is working to get more defensive weapons into Ukraine.
We are working with allies and partners to help get long-range air defense systems into Ukraine, and we're Secretary's working this personally, quite frankly, working with allies and partners to see what they can do.
The Pentagon says it expects more, quote, brutality from the newly appointed Russian commander who has been chosen to oversee now the war in Ukraine.
He and other senior Russian leaders have shown in the past, and you mentioned Syria as one example, have shown clearly in the past their disregard for avoiding civilian harm. Their utter disregard in many ways for the laws of war, laws of armed conflict, and the brutality with which they conduct and prosecute their operations. We're probably turning another page in the same book of Russian brutality.
The Kremlin recently appointed General Alexander Dvornikov, who has a record of brutal attacks against civilians in Syria and in other wars. His appointment comes after Russian forces failed to capture the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv and its surrounding areas. Let's bring in former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor, and former spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the United Nations, Hagar Shamali. She also worked at the NSC and the Treasury Department. Good morning to you both. Hagar, let me begin with you. We were just talking in the break about this General Dvornikov. You've studied him very closely. Just tell our viewers who he is exactly and why this is such an ominous development.
Well, Alexander Dvornikov is a senior Russian general. He was awarded a medal in Russia called the Hero of Russia. So if you see that on Google, that is why. That's not Google saying he's a hero. And it was following his behavior, his leading a mission in Syria, and particularly Aleppo, and how brutally he approached Aleppo, which was really by bulldozing the entire city and recklessly and ruthlessly killing tens of thousands of civilians, innocent civilians there. That is what landed him that award. He has a long history before Syria as well. He's the one who led the charge of Russia into Grozny in the Chechen Republic to brutally kill people there. His whole mantra was to kill anybody they saw walking. So this is who we're dealing with, somebody who's really ruthless, who's really the worst of the worst in the Russian military, and he's actually the one who is what flipped the switch in Syria. Up until he led that operation in Syria, the Syrian government was really losing that war, and it was Russia's participation, Russia's obviously provision of weapons and arms and financing that really switched things around for Syrian President Assad, and it is largely due to him. He's been involved in Ukraine actually now for some time, but there has been nobody appointed by the Russians to oversee the entire military operation and war in Ukraine until now.
Ominous sign for sure. Russian President Vladimir Putin is now turning to what looks similar to a Stalin-esque purge within his government. Although Kremlin officials have publicly claimed the war is going according to plan, behind the scenes, about 150 agents from Moscow's secret intelligence service, the FSB, have been, quote, purged since the war began. This is according to the Times of London. Some have been removed from their jobs and others arrested as Putin looks to assign blame for Russia's failures in Ukraine. Among those arrested, the head of the department directly responsible for overseeing affairs with Ukraine. Something all of those reportedly punished have in common is that they were all employed or formerly employed by a division once led by Putin. The Fifth Service, as it's called, was set up in the late 1990s to carry out operations in the countries formerly controlled by the Soviet Union. The goal of that division, Joe, was to keep all of those nations in Russia's orbit, which is very much what he's trying to do with Ukraine right now.
Obviously not
struggling.
Obviously, Ambassador Taylor, not working so well. I'm curious. You obviously spent much time studying Vladimir Putin. What's your read on this Times of London report, and how ominous is it that he's conducting purges of those closest to him as well as the military?
Well, Joe, it is an indication that he's got big problems. He might now start to be figuring out that he's got these problems, and he realizes that his intelligence and probably his own attitudes toward Ukraine has been wrong. He has misunderstood Ukraine. He has misjudged Ukraine. He is focused on, obsessed with Ukraine to the degree that he didn't understand it. He thought that it would be an easy win, and it wasn't. The Ukrainians are much tougher, are much more of a nation, much more of a people, much more unified than he thought, Joe.
And of course, his actions have only served to make them more unified, more of a nation, more of a people with a purpose. And that purpose is to drive out Vladimir Putin and the Russian stormtroopers that have come in to the country. I'm curious, you're hearing like we are about this new phase of the battle headed east. And of course, we've been warned day after day, week after week, hold on, because this is when Russia and their massive forces are going to roll over Ukraine. We're hearing it again in the east. I'm a bit skeptical. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Are the Ukrainians up to the battle?
Ukrainians will fight to the end, Joe. There is no doubt. And the question is, can we provide enough weapons for them? Mika asks this every time. Do they get enough? We'll know if they're going to get enough. We'll know if they've gotten enough when they win. If they win, they will have gotten enough. And you're right about this next phase. This could even include chemical weapons. We hear some stories about chemical weapons not yet confirmed, but that's a real concern in Mariupol.
Yeah, and you know, Mike Barnicle, when I say I'm skeptical that things are going to magically turn around for the Russians just because they're trying to consolidate an area in the Donbass that they haven't been able to nail down for 8 years. And yes, they're bringing in a mass murderer. They're bringing in a war criminal. But that war criminal, it's not like he hasn't been called into action since the beginning of this debacle. And now the Times of London report shows that Putin is having to purge those closest to him, the very people that he depended on to rise to power. He's increasingly isolated. His military is increasingly in disarray. And now we're hearing about this May 9th deadline, or this May 9th date that Putin wants to end the war by. Sounds like a pretty good idea to me. If you're Vladimir Putin, get this behind you as fast as possible.
Yeah, May 9th is going to be a critical date, the celebration, the yearly celebration of the end of World War II, Russians' victory in World War II, defeating the Germans, helping the Allies win World War II. Ambassador Taylor, what I'd like you to tell us, given your knowledge of the Ukraine, given your knowledge of the topography of the Ukraine, this new set battle in the east with a new commander of a totally undisciplined army. Am I wrong in thinking that the initial stages of this battle visually will remind people of old World War II clips of the Panzer Division rolling across Poland?
I think you're exactly right. The planes out there, the steppes really of what we're talking about, and that's good for tanks. It's good for mounted artillery. It will look like World War II. That said, those troops, they've been in the field for a long time. They've been in the field, since December, January. And they got beaten up, really badly beaten up around Kyiv. And now they are having a long move. Joe's right about that convoy. We've seen a convoy get beaten up before, and the Ukrainians will fight that one. It is more difficult out there because in the north there were forests. In the east that we're looking at now, it's more wide open. So it'll be a challenge for the Ukrainians, but the challenge the Ukrainians will meet.
And by the way, Hagar, if Putin's goal was to break up NATO and to cleave these nations apart, it's adding members now. Finland and Sweden now expected this summer to join. But let's talk about that May 9th date. Does that stand out to you as something significant that actually Putin may want to have some kind of victory, whatever that means, whatever that looks like, to claim on that day? Is that important to him?
Well, in history, he's shown that he likes history. Maybe he lies a lot about it, but he likes history, and he likes to try and be poetic with these types of things. So he is going to look, a lot of Russia experts believe that he's going to look to make some kind of celebratory announcement that day. So it is definitely something that we should look to, but I don't want to say look forward to, because the fact that they have now moved their military to move toward the east, because probably they were spread too thin and didn't expect the resistance they faced by the Ukrainians, to move toward the east. The fact that what I expect is just what we saw in Syria, because we've seen them do this before. This is their playbook. It's just that we didn't act as much on it. We didn't see the UN falter as much about it. This guy, this Alexander Dubrovnik, he should have been. Sorry, that's not his name. He should have been claimed as a war criminal years ago. Dvornikov, thank you. He should have been claimed as a war criminal years ago. He should have been charged with that. We know this. We have evidence of his behavior, and yet it's only now that it's coming. So I expect things to worsen over the next 30 days. And when the ambassador said, Ambassador Bill Taylor, when he said that Putin has made this gross miscalculation, this is one of the reasons to show that NATO is now going to be not only further unified and emboldened, but probably expanded even further. I don't blame Finland or Sweden at all for wanting to join NATO. That is exactly what I would do if I were them.
Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.